Go to Daniel chapter 2. As the kids are filing out, Daniel chapter 2 is where we're going to pick up here in just a moment. But by way of just quick introduction, recap from what we learned last week, we started a new series that we're going to be in for the next little while in the book of Daniel, the story of Daniel. And if you don't remember, let me just give you an overview of what we covered. Daniel and his friends, the people of Judah, had been conquered by a foreign, pagan, awful, wicked king and his empire of Babylon. And they got to keep their lives, we learned, but they lost everything else that they held dear. They lost their homeland. They lost their way of life. They even lost their names. They were sent into exile to not just live in Babylon, but to become Babylonians. They were forced to learn Babylonian ways, their laws, their languages, their customs, their religions, all of it. And so they were faced with this choice. Either they can abandon God, because they had every reason to, every opportunity to, and chase after what works, what's right in front of them. They could have gotten lost in the Babylonian system, or even though they couldn't see what tomorrow might bring, and even though what they could see was terrible, everything was awful, they could trust that God was good and trust that he knew what he was doing and remain faithful. And what happened last week? Faced in an impossible situation, Daniel and his friends remained faithful to God, and they found out that God is faithful first, and God provided, and God took care of them, and so they could keep going. And so what we found last week, even though this story has Daniel's name on it, who's this story really about? Who's the real hero here in this story? It's God. So Daniel and his friends are good, and they're inspiring figures, and we can and should model our lives after them, but ultimately we need to realize what they realize, and it's that our God is king. And so we can be faithful no matter what. And that leads us into our passage for today. As we continue in this story here in chapter 2, it's going to be a lot. We're going to cover a lot this morning, but we're going to see a perfect example of what it was like for Daniel living in Babylon and serving the king and the situations that it put him in. But before we get into it this morning, I want to say two things here up front. Just very practically speaking, as we go week by week, we're going to cover at least one chapter a week, and it's going to be a lot of material. And so my word of encouragement to you, let me put it more strongly, your homework each week is to go home and read the chapter or chapters at length yourself. Because as much as I want to, I'm not going to keep you here for an hour and teach through every possible detail that we could cover, but there's so much good stuff here that I don't want you to miss out on. So either in advance for the sermon to come next week or after the sermon, go home and read the chapters that we cover and fill in all the gaps with the details that we don't have time to touch on specifically. And related to that, for our time this morning, we're going to do the best we can to cover as much as we can. But the way to do that, and that I think will be helpful for us, is we're going to cover the basics of the storyline, hit the action points, if you will, but then we're going to focus our attention on why it matters. So not just what's going on in the story, but how does that story speak to us and our stories today and teach us to be faithful too? That's going to be our focus, and that's what we're going to do. So let's take a look. Follow along as I read out loud for us. Daniel chapter 2, starting with verses 1 through 12. It says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. So then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and they stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. But the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, then you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you do show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me both the dream and its interpretation. But they answered him a second time and said, well, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show you its interpretation. But the king answered and said, I know now with certainty that you're trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. But if you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. But the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great and powerful king has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except for the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. So because of this, the king was angry, and he was very furious, and he commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So, what happened here? What's going on here? We start with a dream. The king has a dream, and according to verse 1, it's not a good one. It's not necessarily a nightmare, but it's weird enough and concerning enough that it wakes him up and he can't go back to sleep. So what did the king do? What he often did, what they often did, what he had the privilege to do. In the middle of the night, it doesn't matter. I bring my wise men, all of them. I want them to come and tell me what my dream means. And when they show up, how do they respond? Just like they're supposed to. Just like they've been trained to, with a lot of humility. "O great king, may you live forever." That's a really good start if you're ever in front of a tyrant and he's making impossible demands on your life. "O great king, may you live forever." Just tell us what the dream was, and we will gladly take it from there. We'll explain everything that it means. But how does Nebuchadnezzar respond? He's angry. He's frustrated with him. He says, "No, you heard what I said. I want you to tell me both. Tell me both what my dream was and what it means. And if you don't, I'm going to get real creative with how I destroy your life. I'm going to get brutal. It's going to be thorough. I'm going to wipe you from existence as if you were never born. But if you can tell me the dream is interpretation, I'm going to bless you with wealth and riches and honor beyond your wildest dreams." Now, I don't know about you, but if I was in that situation, that's some really strong motivation, isn't it? To come up with something, to figure something out. But what's the problem? That the magicians and the sorcerers and the enchanted, all these pagan wise men, what's the problem that they recognize from the very front? They just can't do it. They just can't do it. This is a death sentence for them. So understandably, they start to panic. And they back up a little bit and they try to buy a little bit of time and they try to reason with the king, but he's not hearing it. And the more they talk, the angrier he's getting. Look, great king, we love you. You're the best. You're wonderful. We're here to serve, but what you're asking is impossible. No king has ever asked anyone this sort of thing because it just can't be done. It's not humanly possible. But the king doesn't care, does he? He's too worried about his dream. He's too frustrated with his wise men that aren't so wise, as it turns out, and he's too powerful for anyone's good. And so he says, "All right, you're all done. I told you I'd kill you, and I'm going to kill you." That's where the story pauses. But what do we learn from this? What does this mean for our lives? If you're taking notes, you can write this down. This shows us that pagan religion might work, but it's empty in the end. Look, there's a reason. Let's be honest, there's a reason why Nebuchadnezzar called on his wise men to come help him, because they were good at what they did. I mean, they weren't just making things up as they went along. There was a long history of this sort of thing. There was an entire industry in Babylon devoted to this sort of thing, what we might call the mystic arts. So in a sense, their pagan religious system, all their beliefs and all their practices and all their rituals and methods that went along with it, it worked. It had been working. It had gotten them results before. And so Nebuchadnezzar calls on them because he wants results now. But ultimately, what happens? Their system, their practices, their religion, which has gotten results before, can't now when it matters most. And it doesn't just get exposed as limited. It gets exposed as empty. I mean, think about it. The king has called together the best of the best, the professionals, the elite, the top of their respective fields, and they flat out admit that they can't handle this, that this is beyond them, that their religion, they're saying, has earned them a living, but they recognize in this moment it can't save their lives. And it's not just about this particular moment, is it? What's being exposed here is the deeper issue that their religion might be practical, but it's not really all that powerful. It works on the surface, but not truly deeply in any meaningful way. Look again at what they say in verse 11. On the one hand, their confession in verse 11 is important because we recognize as the readers of the story where this story is going, where it's building. We recognize that this is just building up for God to do what they say can't be done and for him to work through Daniel to do it. But before we move on to that, I think it's good for us to pause here and ask ourselves if we fall into the same kind of trap that the Babylonians did. Think about it in our own lives, individually and collectively. How often are we tempted to do things a certain way because it works? Because it's gotten us results before, because it's popular, because that's just the way things are. That's just how this world operates. We do it because that's what everyone does, and it's been working for a long time. How often are we tempted to think that way and act that way? And this comes up, we know, in politics all the time, but this is not just about politics, is it? How often have we used the very same methods as everyone else to get what we want, but we convince ourselves that it's okay because we're different? We convince ourselves that we can act like the rest of the world, but it's different when we do it because we're Christians, because we have good motivations or good intentions, or because we want good things in the end. But we need to hear today, that's not good. That doesn't honor God. It doesn't matter if it works for the world. That's not what we are called to. And if we want to work like the rest of the world, then we're going to get what the rest of the world gets. And that's moments that we find our limits and we're stuck. But God's people are called to so much more. God has already shown us the truth. Our job as God's people is not to get results. Our job is to be faithful to Him and to trust Him in His way of doing things. We are to trust God, not Babylon. And that's just what Daniel does. So let's keep reading, verses 13 through 23. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed. And so they sought out Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. And he declared to Arioch, saying, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" And Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. So Daniel went in, and he requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Verse 17. But then Daniel went to his house, and he made the matter known to his friends, to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. And he told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. And then Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and Daniel answered, he responded, and he said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might. And you have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter." So, what happened here? Since Daniel and his friends had been trained, we saw this in chapter 1, in the mystic arts of Babylon. Therefore, they served the kingdom in government jobs as wise men in different ways. That means they were on the chopping block too. And so the king's captain of the guard is making his rounds, ready to put everyone to death. He shows up at Daniel's door with a death sentence. But how does Daniel respond? It says he doesn't panic. He remains calm somehow. He remains poised somehow. And he confidently says, what's the big deal? What's the big hurry? I'll take care of it. And he goes and he makes an appointment with the king confidently, saying, yeah, just set a time and I'll come tell you all about your dream. But anyone can do that, right? Anyone can bluster. Anyone can bluff. Anyone can buy some time to come up with something. But it's what Daniel does next that makes all the difference. What does he do? He goes home to pray with his friends. He goes home. And he gathers his friends together and he tells them what's on the line, and he tells them, but this is the way forward. Let's ask God. Let's throw ourselves on God's mercy. Let's open ourselves up to the God of the universe and see what he's up to, because surely he's up to something. They knew what they were up against. They knew they had no earthly human hope to escape what was coming, but unlike the pagan wise men, they knew who to turn to find a way forward. It was the Lord. It says the Lord heard their prayers and the Lord answered their prayers that very night. But I hope we recognize that's not what's most important here. See, the story could have moved right along, and it was pushing. It was moving so fast. Then this happened, and then Daniel did this, and then he prayed this, and then God answered, and then it's moving, and moving. But then what happens here? It could have moved us right into the next scene. Fast forward to when Daniel's standing before the king and ready to give the interpretation, but the text slows us down and it pauses because it wants to linger here. The style and the language changes. The speed of the passage changes. And Daniel changes from just talking, from just praying to what? To praising and to worshiping. He goes from prose, from storytelling, to singing God's praises, to worship. So what does that tell us? It tells us this: Daniel didn't separate the gift from the giver. Daniel didn't separate the gift from the giver. So do we see that this morning? And do we see why that matters and why that makes such a difference? I mean, think about how easy it would have been for Daniel and his friends to mistake or to misunderstand God's favor that they experienced in chapter 1. Think how easy it would have been for them to assume that they just somehow got lucky, that they just kept winning, that they kept advancing. They could have assumed that they got lucky, or they could have assumed that it was due to their hard work, how special they were, how important they were. But regardless, they would have missed the real point. The point was never about the gift. It was always about the giver. Look, God didn't show Daniel and his friends favor and bless them with wisdom and skill and success as just a one-time thing. And God didn't bless them. He didn't show them favor as kind of a go choose your own adventure type thing where he gives them the power and then he just releases them to figure it out on their own. The point from the beginning was always to recognize where the gifts were coming from so that they could keep that connection strong moving forward, right? The moment mattered in the moment, but Daniel had the foresight and the wisdom to know life isn't just one moment. There's more to come. So it's not just about me doing good or being good in this moment. It's about me trusting God and what he has coming next. So it's not about the gifts. It's about the giver. Because that's what helps us endure. That's what keeps us sane when the world is going crazy all around us. That's what forges our character rather than burning us up in the heat of the moment. Staying close to God, seeking him, and trusting him, and following him. And what does Daniel do here? Worshiping him. I don't want to chase into this too much. I'm going to give you a little bit of my own heart. I can tell you with certainty from my life, when I'm panicked, I don't usually worship. Daniel does. I'm convicted. I'm moved. I'm challenged by his response. He trusted God. He didn't even see what was coming, and he pauses. And in this moment, he says, I know you're good, and you're worthy of my praise. And he worships here. And you know why he does it here? Because he's done it before. He knows that the gifts are good, but he knows the giver is better. And so that's who he runs to when it matters most. That's who he runs to when he needs help. That's who he runs to when he doesn't know what to do next. And he responds in beautiful, glorious praise of God's goodness. But again, I think you and I often, if you're like me, we struggle with this. We struggle on the back end. On the front end, we know God is good. When God blesses us, we receive God's blessings, his favor. When he provides for us, when he does what no one else can do, when we've seen him work miracles, we have no problem receiving those good things from him and even praising him for it. But it's then like we get spiritual amnesia. As soon as things get hard, we turn right back to panicking all over again. But that's not what we're called to here. Daniel gets it right. He doesn't take God's gifts for granted. And he doesn't think of them just moment by moment. He knows who saved the day, and he sticks with him. He knows who saved the day from the beginning. He'll save the day again tomorrow and the day after that as ever it's needed. And so his focus then is not on the gifts. It's not on his situation. It's on who God is and what he's doing. So Daniel doesn't just praise God in front of his friends because he sees it's more than just this moment. He praises him in the next moment and the next moment. His life is going to be a living praise and testimony to the goodness and the power of his God. And so fast forward, when he does stand before the king asks him, okay, are you the one? You know what happens if you don't get this right? Are you able to tell me about my dream? And Daniel boldly says, no, I can't. No one can, but there's a God in heaven who can. And he has sent me here today to tell you, O great king, what's coming next. So buckle up, because it's a doozy. So let's look. Look down, starting at verse 31 through 45. So Daniel tells the king, you saw, O king, and behold, a great image. And this image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, it stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. And the head of this image was of fine gold. Its chest and arms were of silver. Its middle and its thighs were of bronze. Its legs were made of iron, and its feet were made partly of iron and partly of clay. And as you looked at it, there was a stone cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and it broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, all of them together were broken into pieces. And they became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away. Not a trace of them could be found. But that stone that struck the image, it became a great mountain, and it filled the whole earth. Now this was the dream. So let me tell you, O king, its interpretation. You, O great king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given this kingdom and this power and the might and the glory, and to whose hand God has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over all of them. You are the head of gold. Now another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and then yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with the soft clay, so they will mix together with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall his kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these other kingdoms and bring them to an end, and his kingdom shall stand forever. Just as you saw the stone that was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Ooh, okay. So what happened there? Did we track all that? Did you get a mental image of what was going on? What was the king's dream? It was weird. It was this massive statue, right? And it was overwhelmingly massive. It was so big, and it wasn't just big. We've seen big things before. It was big, and it was like radiating light. It was glowing, and so it wasn't interesting. It was terrifying. And each section of the statue, starting at the top, moving down, was made from different elements, different metals. It started with gold on top and moved to silver, and then bronze, and then iron mixed with clay. But then out of nowhere, what happened? A stone showed up, and it comes flying into the scene, and it smashes at the feet of the statue, and the whole statue comes crumbling down. But it doesn't just come crumbling down and lie there in a heap. It disintegrates. Like dust in the wind, it vanishes as if it had never existed before. But that simple stone that came out of nowhere, that undid all these things, it sticks around, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows to a mighty mountain that fills the entire earth. So what does that mean? Well, what does it mean? Well, I want to be honest with you this morning. We're not going to spend any time today getting lost in the weeds of trying to interpret this dream. And there's a whole lot of people who are a whole lot smarter than me, who spend a whole lot of time doing that, and trying to figure out and decipher and decode and map out and explain all the details here. But I don't think that's the point of this passage. Not for us today, and not even for the king back then. So what is the point? The point is this. If you're taking notes, please write this down. God is over the rise and fall of kingdoms. That's it. That's the point. Not getting lost. Don't get distracted by the weirdness of the dream and what it means. This is what the text is trying to lift our eyes to see. God is over the rise and fall of the kingdom. So again, the point for us isn't to try to decipher or decode or figure out which part of the statue correlates to which human kingdom in history. The point is that there's a God in the driver's seat of history, and he's up to something really incredible. So God tells the king through Daniel, look, you and your kingdom, O Nebuchadnezzar, are great. You're impressive. You're powerful, but it's not going to last. Same for all the other kings and kingdoms that come next. I've assigned them, God says, their proper place and their purpose, and they're going to come and go just like you. But there's another kingdom that's coming. My kingdom, God says. And when my kingdom comes, it'll never be destroyed. It'll never be conquered. It'll never belong to anyone else. It'll overcome any and every other earthly kingdom that ever rises up, and my kingdom will last forever. Just so you know, O great King, where you fall in my story that I'm writing. That's the point here. That's what God is communicating through Daniel to the king and to us. History is going somewhere. There's going to be lots of ups and downs. There's going to be lots of twists and turns, a lot of crazy things that are going to happen, but God is in control, and he's driving history to his good ends. Like the old saying goes, I may not know what tomorrow holds, but I can know who holds tomorrow. That's what this passage is calling to us. So, when earthly kingdoms rise up and make a lot of noise like they do, we can remember who the true king is. And when we can't see or understand what God is up to or what he's going to do next or why he lets certain things happen the way that he does, we can still trust and know that he's good and he's up to something. And even when everything around us is awful, Daniel, even when everything around us feels like a dead end, or even when everything around us feels hostile and toxic to our faith, we can still be faithful. And not because we're so great or because we're so strong or because we're so wise or because we're so whatever, but because our God is so good and he's so great and he's faithful first. So let's look now at the final section and then we'll close. Verses 46 through 49. It says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face, and he paid homage to Daniel. And he commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him, to Daniel. And the king answered, and he said to Daniel, Truly, your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. And then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And then Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his friends, over the affairs of the province of Babylon. And Daniel remained at the king's court. So, what happened here? The king hears Daniel's response, hears Daniel's explanation, and he gladly receives it. He fully believes it, and he's so excited about what Daniel has been able to do and what Daniel has says. He doesn't just give Daniel a promotion, he gives him a full promotion and a full reward, and he's in generous spirits. And Daniel says, Can you set my friends up too? And the king says, Absolutely. Whatever you want, you've got it. He's that excited about what Daniel has told him. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. It's good and it's exciting that God is taking care of Daniel this way, that Daniel was brave and courageous and faithful in an impossible situation, and God came through and Daniel was blessed by it. And not just Daniel, who else is blessed by Daniel's faithfulness? His friends, and who else? All those pagan wise men who were set to die, they get to live, and Daniel, this blessing surrounds him and follows him. And that's present here, but maybe you can tell by the tone of my voice that that's not the point here. Did anything strike you as odd in this section? Like, did anything the king said or how he acted, did it just not quite sit right with you? Look back through what he does. As happy and as excited and as generous as the king is, where's his focus? Where does he direct his praise? To Daniel. He says good and true and appropriate and important things about God, but he's not focused on God. He says good, true things about God, but it doesn't lead him to worship God. Again, his praise is directed to Daniel. He falls down at the feet of Daniel. He demands that offerings and incense and prayer and worship be directed to Daniel. So what does that mean? What does that show us? One last thing, if you're still taking notes, write this down. We can see the truth and still miss the point if we don't turn to God. If we can see the truth, we can be confronted by the truth and still miss the point if we don't turn to God. I mean, once we get past the surface level warm fuzzies of Daniel's reward and his promotion, it should hit us that this king is an absolute fool. And it's not just that God's fingerprints are all over this story, but Nebuchadnezzar misses it because he doesn't know to look for it. It's that God made it abundantly clear God wasn't playing games. God spoke directly to the king, first through a dream and then through Daniel to wake the king up to reality, and the king still came to all the wrong conclusions. That's how blinded he was by his pride and his power. He even said all the right things about God, but he never humbled himself before God. The king got what he wanted. He got answers to his weird little dream that he had, but then he heard what he wanted, and he made it all about him. What's he excited about? He hears this incredible dream and its interpretation of how God is king and how his time is coming, and more are going to follow after him, but ultimately God's going to build up his everlasting kingdom. All this explanation of what is coming, and Nebuchadnezzar just hears, I'm the head of gold. And he moves on with about his business. He saw the point and he missed it because he didn't connect it to God. Look, you and I can laugh today, but we need to be careful that we don't do the same thing in our lives. Which brings me to a closing question. How are you and I going to respond to the truth that God reigns? How are you and I in our lives today going to respond to the truth that God reigns? Because again, that's the big takeaway here. All the other stuff about dreams and revelations and even the good stuff about Daniel and his courage and wisdom and faithfulness, all that's secondary at best. The truth that God reigns, the truth that God's plans are unstoppable, that God's kingdom isn't just coming, but it's coming and it's going to be everlasting. That's why God orchestrated this whole scene to begin with. So what are you and I going to do about it? How are we going to respond? Are we going to be like Nebuchadnezzar and say, that's cool, good information, but I'm going to keep doing my own thing anyway? Are we going to put that truth off as if it's something we can just deal with later in our life? Listen, we need to know, we don't put God off for later. As we've learned last week, and maybe as you know in your own life, that if we don't humble ourselves willingly before the Lord when he reveals himself, he's going to humble us in his judgment now and the day to come. So are we going to be like Nebuchadnezzar and hear some things about God, but only listen to the parts that we like and only listen to the parts that do what we want and make us feel good? Or are we truly going to humble and submit ourselves to this great God and who he is and what he's doing? In other words, will we be like Daniel? Will our lives be marked by our faithfulness? Again, not because we're so strong, but because we know God is so good. Will our lives be marked by faithfulness even when we can't see what's happening next? Will we let go of panic and turn instead to praise? Will we let go of trying to figure everything out and know every detail and instead trust in God's promises? So when it feels like everything is stacked against us, and even if we're stuck in a dead end, will we rest in the fact that dead ends are nothing to our God? Because what have we learned about him here? He's not just the Lord of history. That's part of it. He's the Lord of life. What's death to him? What does he have coming to those who belong to him? Resurrection, life everlasting. So hopefully we see how this passage, even though it pulls us in and we can get really excited about it, it doesn't keep us here and it doesn't let us stay here in our own lives. It lifts our gaze to see the bigger picture of who God is and what he's doing. So, whatever you're dealing with in your life today, whatever you're carrying, whatever you're facing, you can stay faithful. Why? Because our God reigns. And however you might be living, and however you might be struggling, however you might have made a way in this life, in a kingdom, in a country that might be good, but sure isn't going to last forever, you can stay faithful no matter what comes your way through the rise and fall of all things, because our God is faithful and he reigns. And in case we ever forget, Jesus, the living embodiment of our hope, the greatest fulfillment of all God's promises, the king of this great kingdom, the bringer of this great kingdom, he reminds us again. I told us last week, we might have to hear it every week. The words of Jesus himself says this: in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. Why? Because I have overcome the world. I have overcome the world. So there's nothing that we can face that Daniel didn't face. And there's nothing that we can face that God's people throughout the ages haven't already faced. But will we trust that there is a king, that he is on the throne, and that his way is right? if we will, it won't be just about this moment amongst friends who already know and love the Lord. But when we leave this place, will our lives be marked by faithfulness that point to our King's faithfulness? That's what makes a difference.